Sister banned me from her wedding because her fiancé was too nice to me. He found out, called off the wedding. And now my entire family are demanding that I fix everything. Hi everyone. My name is Michaela 24F. And I'm here because I really need your opinions. So I have an older sister, Leah 29F, who was supposed to be getting married to Jonathan 29 meters. Everything seemed to be going great with them. They've been together for years, and we all thought they were perfect for each other. But recently things took a really strange and unexpected turn, and now their wedding is off. The reason Jonathan has refused to marry my sister, because he thinks she's being cruel by not allowing me to come to their wedding. On top of that, Leah believes Jonathan is in love with me. I know how insane that sounds, but let me explain to give you some background. I'm not close to my sister or my parents. It's not like anything dramatic happened to cause a fallout. But once I got into college, I kind of drifted away from them. In fact, I've barely been home since I moved out for school. Most spring breaks, instead of going back home, I'd either travel or head to my grandparents' house. It just felt like a better option than dealing with the awkwardness that would come from being at home. The thing is, my parents and sister are completely different people. From me, we've never really fit in with each other. If that makes sense. They've got their own little world that I don't really belong to. I've always felt like they never understood me and honestly never even tried. I remember growing up, they would all bond over stuff that I didn't care about. And whenever I brought up something I was interested in, it was like I was speaking a foreign language. They just never engaged. They'd listen, nod, and change the topic back to whatever they were interested in. So after a while I stopped trying. Here's the thing that hurts the most though. When I started pulling back from them, they didn't even try to reach out to me. It was like they were perfectly okay with me distancing myself. Almost like they were happy to have me out of their lives. And honestly, that stung. You think family would notice when one of their own is slowly drifting away, but they didn't seem to care. It just confirmed what I felt all along, that I didn't really belong with them. It got to the point where I only visited them for the major holidays, birthdays, and other celebrations. But even then it felt more like I was just a guest in their lives. I'd show up, do the family thing, and then leave. The conversation was always polite, but surface level there was no warmth, no connection, and my sister Leah and I never had that close bond that a lot of siblings have. She's always been the golden child in the family, the one who followed the path my parents wanted, did everything right and fit perfectly into their world. I was always the odd one out, the black sheep. It's not that they're bad people or anything, but they can be real bullies in the way they subtly put me down. You know, those little comments that seem innocent on the surface but hit deep. Yeah, that's what I'd get. So over time I figured it was just better to spend as little time with them as possible. Why put myself in a situation where I feel unwelcome and out of place? The thing is, last Christmas, Jonathan joined us for Christmas dinner. And honestly, it was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel completely invisible. My family has this way of making me feel like I don't belong, like I'm an outsider in my own home. But Jonathan didn't treat me like that. He was genuinely nice to me. He talked to me like I was a normal human being, not like the weird black sheep that I always feel like around my family. At first I didn't think much of it. I mean, it was just basic decency, right? But for some reason this really bothered Leah. It's not like Jonathan and I were having some deep, intimate conversation. We just talked about random stuff. Travel, school, some funny things that happened at work. You know, normal stuff. But Leah, she immediately got weird about it. She gave me these icy looks throughout dinner, but I didn't think too much of it. That wasn't until later in the evening when she straight up confronted me. I'll never forget it. She pulled me aside and said, "I know what you're doing. You've always been jealous of me and now you're trying to steal my man." I was honestly in shock. I mean, what? Steal her man? Where did that even come from? I laughed it off and told her she was being ridiculous. But she didn't drop it. She kept going on about how Jonathan was acting different when he was around me and how I was being too friendly with him. I didn't even know how to respond. It was such an insane accusation. Like, where was this even coming from? Leah has always had this thing where she's the center of attention. She's the perfect one, the one who my parents adore. And I get it, she's their golden child. But accusing me of trying to steal her fiancé, that was a new low even for her. I tried to brush it off though, like I usually do with her drama. It's not like we're close anyway. So I figured she was just being paranoid or insecure for whatever reason. But here's the thing, after that night, things got weird between all of us. Leah became even more distant, which I didn't think was possible. We were never close to begin with. But now it was like she was actively avoiding me. If I tried to talk to her, she'd give me these one-word answers or act like she couldn't be bothered. At family gatherings, she'd be glued to Jonathan's side, almost like she was marking her territory. It was ridiculous. Jonathan, on the other hand, acted like nothing had changed. He was still polite, still friendly, and still normal around me. I guess what really bothers me is how quickly my family seemed to side with Leah on this. I mean, no one ever said anything directly to me, but there were little signs. My mom would give me these weird looks whenever Leah and Jonathan were around. My dad, who's usually pretty neutral, started making more comments about how it's important for family to support each other, or how relationships need to be respected. It was all very passive-aggressive. It's like they were all buying into this idea that I was somehow a threat to Leah's relationship. And the more I thought about it, the more it made me angry. I've never been the type to get involved in anyone's drama, let alone my sister's relationship. I mean, I barely even talk to Leah outside of family functions. So, why would I suddenly be interested in her fiancé? It made no sense. A few months later, I found out from my grandparents that Leah was actually engaged. Yep, my own sister didn't even bother to tell me she was getting married. I mean, at this point, I wasn't exactly expecting her to send me a personalized invitation with hearts and glitter or anything, but still, finding out from my grandparents felt like a punch to the gut. You know, the kind that confirms everything you already suspected about your family not caring about you. I guess I've been holding onto some small hope that, even with all the tension and distance, she'd still consider me part of this major event in her life. I thought, hey, we're sisters, right? Even if we're not close, I'm still her family. But no, that was clearly too much to ask for. I didn't say anything to Leah when I found out about the engagement. At first I thought maybe she was just busy with wedding planning. Or maybe it slipped her mind to tell me. I know that sounds naive, but for some reason I was still giving her the benefit of the doubt. I figured maybe she'd call me eventually, or maybe I'd at least get a last-minute invitation in the mail. But days turned into weeks and nothing. Crickets. Then out of the blue, Leah called me. I was honestly surprised to see her name pop up on my phone, especially considering we hadn't really spoken since that weird accusation over Christmas. I answered, trying to act casual, like I hadn't been completely forgotten by my own sister. After a few awkward minutes of small talk, she dropped the bombshell. I'm not inviting you to the wedding. I was silent for a second, trying to process what she just said. I mean, it wasn't like I was super excited to go or anything, but hearing her say it out loud still hurt. I asked her why, and that's when she hit me with the most absurd reason. Since Jonathan has feelings for you, I don't want you there, it'll just be awkward. I had to laugh, like literally. I laughed out loud. I couldn't believe this was happening. First of all, Jonathan doesn't have feelings for me. And even if he did, it's not like I was going to stand up in the middle of the ceremony and profess my undying love for him. The whole thing was so ridiculous that I didn't even have the energy to argue. I just said have a great wedding and a happy marriage and hung up. I didn't need that drama in my life. And honestly, we weren't close. So, it didn't really matter to me if I was part of her big day or not. I've long since come to terms with the fact that Leah and I were living into completely different worlds. Yesterday was wild. I think it was Leah's rehearsal dinner or something, and I had no plans to be involved in any of it. I mean, I wasn't invited to the wedding, and I'd already made peace with that. I was just going about my usual day when out of the blue, I got this frantic call from my dad. He's like, Michaela, you need to come down to the venue right now. No explanation, no details. Just a demand for me to drop everything and go. Naturally, I was confused and asked what was going on. But he completely refused to tell me. Just kept repeating that I needed to come immediately. At this point, I wasn't exactly feeling generous with my time or patience. This was the same family that had excluded me from the wedding, treated me like an outsider, and basically made me feel like I was the villain in Leah's twisted little drama. So I told him straight up, I'm not coming there just because you tell me to. And I hung up. Not even 5 minutes later, my phone started buzzing again. This time it's Leah now. I hadn't spoken to her since the whole wedding invite drama, so I was already dreading whatever nonsense she was about to throw at me. But what she said next, I couldn't believe it. Apparently Jonathan, her fiancé, had straight up refused to marry her. Like the guy had called off the wedding because he couldn't stand how cruel Leah and my parents were. I mean, wow. The guy actually had the guts to see through all their BS and walk away. I was low-key impressed. But of course Leah wasn't calling to apologize or anything. Nope, she had a completely different reason for reaching out. She wanted me to show up at the rehearsal dinner or whatever was left of it, and pretend like we were one big, happy family. The kicker. She wanted me to lie and say the reason I wasn't at the wedding was because I didn't want to be there, not because she had banned me. Basically, she wanted me to cover for her and make it look like everything was still picture perfect, even though her entire relationship was crumbling. I almost laughed in her face. I mean, after everything she put me through, accusing me of trying to steal her fiancé, not inviting me to the wedding, treating me like garbage, she now wanted me to swoop in and save the day. The sheer delusion of it all was mind-blowing. I flat out told her, "You're out of your mind if you think I'm going to do that." I could practically hear her jaw hit the floor through the phone. She tried to argue, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I hung up, put my phone on silent, and went to sleep like a baby. Jonathan calling off the wedding is like the ultimate karmic justice. I don't know the details of why he finally snapped, but I have a pretty good idea. Leah and my parents have always been controlling, manipulative, and frankly pretty mean-spirited. They've never been able to see past their own egos long enough to care about how their actions affect others. I guess Jonathan finally had enough. I almost feel bad for the guy, almost. What really gets me, though, is how quickly Leah and my parents turned to me for help once things started falling apart. It's like they realized, oh wait, maybe we do need Michaela after all. Funny how that works, huh? They didn't care about me when they were planning their perfect wedding, but the second the rug gets pulled out from under them, suddenly I'm important again. Yeah, no thanks. Today was unreal. I woke up to 117 missed calls and over 200 messages from my family. Yeah, you read that right. Over 100 missed calls. My phone was literally blowing up from the moment I opened my eyes. The anxiety that washed over me, seeing all those notifications. Not a fun way to start the day. Most of the calls were from my parents and Leah, and of course I wasn't about to dive into that mess right away. I ignored it and decided to start my morning as normally as possible. Because honestly, who wants to deal with all that drama before coffee? But then I started to feel a little guilty. So I did the one thing I felt like I could handle at the moment. I called my grandparents back. They're the only ones in my family I have a genuinely good relationship with, and I knew they'd give me the lowdown without all the extra drama. As soon as my grandma picked up, I could hear the tension in her voice. She told me that Leah had been crying nonstop since last night. Apparently Jonathan still wasn't budging, and it completely cut her off. Refusing to talk or listen. He was basically, Lee is devastated. And my parents are in full panic mode trying to salvage the situation. My grandma, bless her, gently suggested that maybe I should reach out to Jonathan to clear any misunderstandings. I almost laughed again. Clear any misunderstandings? What misunderstandings? Jonathan made his choice and it had nothing to do with me. But at the same time, I get where my grandparents are coming from. I love them and I hate to see them stressed out because of all this. Plus, I can't lie. Part of me is just so over the constant harassment from my family. If talking to Jonathan will get everyone off my back and stop the barrage of calls and messages, maybe it's worth it. What do you guys think? Update 1. Hi guys. I know it's only been a few hours since my last post, but a lot has happened, so here's the update. Buckle up because it's wild. So almost an hour after I made the post, I was trying to relax and clear my head. I thought maybe the drama would die down a bit after I ignored all their calls and messages. But nope, my doorbell rings. And when I check who's there, it's my entire family, my parents. Leah and Jonathan, yep. They showed up unannounced, and I was not ready for whatever was about to happen. They told me they wanted to come inside and talk, like this was some kind of intervention or something. But honestly, I wasn't about to let them into my personal space. Especially not after everything that had gone down. So I stepped outside, shut the door behind me, and told them that whatever they had to say, they could say it right there on my porch. Leah was the first to speak, and she immediately jumped into her hole. You need to fix this routine. She basically ordered me to explain everything to Jonathan, like I was supposed to clean up her mess and magically make things okay. I just stood there for a second, trying to process the sheer audacity of it all. But then I realized, nope. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to lie for her. I'm not going to twist the truth to make her look good, when the reality is she's been awful to me for years. So I turned to Jonathan and laid it all out. I told him the truth, that Leah had accused me of trying to steal him, that she banned me from the wedding because she thought he had feelings for me, and that this kind of behavior from my family wasn't new. It's been like this since we were kids. The manipulation, the blame, the toxicity, it's all part of the package. Jonathan stood there listening quietly, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. But then out of nowhere, Leah completely lost it. She slapped me like full on. Open-handed slapped me across the face. I was shocked, but my first instinct was to slap her right back. I mean, come on. I've put up with her nonsense for years and now this. But just as I raised my hand, Jonathan stepped in and grabbed Leah by the arm. He pulled her aside away from me, and they started talking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear everything, but it was clear that things were about to get even messier. A few minutes later, Leah came back and she was crying. Like really crying. She looked at all of us, me, my parents and Jonathan, and said that the engagement was officially over. Jonathan had broken things off for good. He told her they shouldn't see each other anymore, and he left just like that. He walked away, leaving Leah standing there in tears. And honestly, I did feel a little sorry for her in that moment. As much as we've never gotten along and as much as she's hurt me, I don't think anyone deserves to have their engagement broken off like that. It was a brutal, raw moment. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that this breakup was the result of her own actions. She pushed Jonathan to his breaking point, just like she's pushed me so many times before. So there we were standing on my porch, Leah sobbing, Jonathan gone, and my parents glaring at me like I was somehow responsible for all of this. I could feel their judgment, their disappointment, like they were blaming me for the fact that Leah's life was falling apart. It was like they thought I was the one who had caused the breakup, not Leah and her behavior. I didn't know what to say, and I definitely didn't feel like standing there any longer. So I just awkwardly mumbled something about needing to go inside. I turned around, walked back into my house, and shut the door behind me, leaving them all standing outside. And as soon as I closed that door, I just sat down and tried to process everything that had just happened. It felt like a scene out of a soap opera, but this was my actual life. I haven't heard anything from my parents or Leah since they left. I'm sure they're furious with me. And honestly, I don't know what comes next. Update to hi guys. So a lot of you wanted to know more about what my childhood was like, and why I've been so distant from my family for so long. Honestly, I didn't get into it in my original post, because it's a pretty long story, but I figure now is as good a time as any to unpack a little of it. Maybe it'll help me understand things better too. So here's the thing, I have social anxiety disorder. Growing up, I always felt like something was off with me, but I never had the words to explain it. My parents, though, they were old school. The kind of people who believed mental health issues were just excuses. They'd say things like, "You're just being dramatic," or "You need to toughen up." If I was ever visibly anxious or having a panic attack, they'd call me weak or lazy, like I was choosing to feel that way. So my entire childhood felt like I was constantly being punished for something I couldn't control. Things weren't any better with Leah. She wasn't just the golden child in our family, she was popular at school too. She always had this big group of friends, and they all thought they were better than everyone else. I remember one time when I was about 15. Leah invited some of her friends over for a sleepover. I made the mistake of walking into the kitchen to grab a snack, and as soon as I did, they all went quiet and started giggling. Leah looked at me and said something like, "Oh look, it's our little hermit, she doesn't even know how to talk to people." It might sound small, but that kind of stuff was constant. I was always the punchline to their jokes, and it hurt so much more because it was my own sister who led the charge. There were so many moments like that, where she'd mock my social awkwardness, and instead of standing up for me, my parents would just laugh or brush it off, like it was all harmless fun. But it wasn't fun for me, it was humiliating. When I got to high school, things got even worse. I remember this one particular day. I had a huge presentation for English class. Now for someone with social anxiety, the idea of standing in front of the whole class and speaking was my worst nightmare. I couldn't sleep the night before. And when the morning came, I was physically sick from the anxiety. I told my parents, and they basically told me to suck it up and go. I ended up stuttering my way through the presentation, while the class laughed, and by the time I got home, I was in tears. My parents' response: "It's just a presentation, Michaela. Stop making a big deal out of everything." That was their go-to line. I was always making things into a bigger deal than they were. According to them, by the time I went to college, I was mentally exhausted. I knew I needed help, but my family had made me believe that seeking help was weak. It wasn't until I started seeing the counselor on campus that I realized what I was dealing with wasn't just in my head. The counselor listened to me, really listened, and for the first time, I felt like someone understood what I was going through. She recommended that I see a psychiatrist to get a proper diagnosis. And honestly, getting that diagnosis was such a relief. Knowing that what I was feeling had a name, social anxiety disorder, was a game changer. It meant that I wasn't just being dramatic or looking for attention, like my family had always claimed. After seeing a psychiatrist, I started therapy, and slowly but surely things began to improve. I learned coping mechanisms like how to handle panic attacks, how to communicate my needs without feeling ashamed, and most importantly, how to set boundaries with people who didn't respect me. That's when I really started pulling away from my family. I realized that being around them was triggering my anxiety, and that I needed space to heal. So I stopped coming home for every little thing. I stopped answering every phone call and text. I started choosing myself. And for the first time I felt like I had some control over my life. But of course, my family didn't see it that way. To them, I was abandoning them, being selfish and ungrateful. They never once asked me why I pulled away or if I was okay. Instead, they just accused me of being distant and dramatic. Just like they always had Leah. Of course, continued to be Leah. Whenever I did come home for holidays or birthdays, she'd make snide comments about how I thought I was too good for the family now, or how I was so dramatic for not visiting more often. Things with my family are still strained, though. I keep them at arm's length because every time I try to let them in, they hurt me again. My parents still don't acknowledge my anxiety is real, and Leah as well. She's still Leah even after all these years. She hasn't changed, if anything. Her behavior during this whole Jonathan debacle just proves that she hasn't grown or learned anything. She's still stuck in the same toxic patterns, and I'm not about to let myself get sucked back into that. So yeah. That's a bit more context on why I've kept my distance from my family. It's not easy, and part of me wishes things were different. But at the same time, I've learned to prioritize my own well-being, and honestly, that's been the best decision I've ever made. Update 3. Hello everyone. It's been a month since I made the original post, and I finally have a few updates. First off, my sister Leah decided to channel all of her anger toward me. And let me tell you, it has been a roller coaster. Not only did she leak my number to a bunch of people, which resulted in endless messages from people I didn't want to hear from, but she also took it up a notch and egged my house a few times. Like seriously? Who does that? It's honestly been a nuisance. And I can't tell you how frustrating it is to have to clean eggs off my front door, and driveway I mean. We're adults here, right? At first I tried to ignore it. But after the second time it happened, I was just fed up. I tried reaching out to my parents for some backup, thinking maybe they would intervene and talk some sense into her. But when I called them, they just said, "It's between you two girls." Like really? This is not just sibling rivalry anymore. It's vandalism. I expected them to step in. But I guess they'd rather stay out of it, and keep pretending everything is fine. After realizing I was on my own, I decided it was time to take a stand. I called Leah directly and told her that if she ever did it again, I would file a police complaint against her, because let's be real, it counts as vandalism and she could actually get in trouble for it. The thought of that seemed to hit a nerve, and her reaction was predictable. She launched into a tirade, calling me a bunch of names, and saying how I was being dramatic about everything. I mean, does she even hear herself? It's like she thinks she can just throw a tantrum, and I'm supposed to take it. I hung up feeling a mix of relief and frustration. It was exhausting to deal with her, but at least I got my point across. Surprisingly, she hasn't bothered me since. I don't know if she's scared of the police, or just too busy plotting her next move, but I'll take the peace.